In this video, we are going to work on applying some textures to materials that work in Arnold and creating some simple connections to render out an object. I have right now a model of this octopus that I want to present not as a realistic octopus, but more like a rigid physical sculpture or a made object rather than a organic creature. And this object has been UV'd and I have a UV map right here. So my UV map shows that the object, I select this UV shell here, I select that this object was split on one part, and I can select this other part, and that does the rest of the body. And we're going to apply a texture to that. So if you want to do an easy separation between those two objects and you want to create two different materials, there are two alternatives. One of them, and that might be the easiest one, is actually separating the objects as two different pieces so that you don't have to deal with complex Photoshop work. The other one is creating a texture in Photoshop that uses both areas of the UVs, applying different textures in each one of those areas. Let's start with the easy one. And let's just say that if I want to create two different materials on this object, I'm going to separate those two pieces. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to separate this edge of the object, which goes all the way around, and I know that I'm going to be able to separate that very easily by going under mesh, detach, and then I select my object and then I say mesh separate. Right away you get to see two completely different objects right there that are not on the same. In this case, I will need to modify my UV map, because of course in that case this object becomes a single object with a UV map there, and this one has its own object with a UV map there. And especially this one, I have the opportunity to correct the scale of the UV map. And to do that, I just simply select with the right mouse button, I can select the UV shell, to click on that, and then use the scale tool to scale it up and move it down to use as much of the space of that UV map quadrant right there. On the other piece, let me see if I can do something with the other piece. I might not be able because it's already pushed to the limit. So the other piece, I cannot do much with it. So I have now two objects that have been applied, or better separated, that can be applied to different textures. With that, I'm going to call the hypershade, and I'm going to use Arnold materials. We're going to be rendering this with Arnold, so it may be easier for me to work with Arnold materials. So I'm going to go under Arnold shaders, and I'm going to use the Arnold standard surface shader, which is one that allows you to work with multiple treatments. And in this case, I'm going to just to keep it as it is by default, and I'm going to connect under the base color, under the color itself, I'm going to connect a file, and that file I'm going to connect it to the material that I want it to be on it. So I'm going to just go, and for that I have a material that I searched and I got from a website that I recommend students to use, and that website is textures.com. It's not the only website that allows you to do that, and I'm going to share with you some other ones. But textures.com allows people to use their materials for free, giving them the right to use them for non-commercial purposes. In this case, I can go into 3D scan materials, and I can go and look for all sorts of materials: asphalt, concrete, stone, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of stuff, and when you click on one of those materials, let's say you go under leather, I go inside of the leather, and inside of leather I have the texture, the color of the material, the image for what could be used as one map, or what another one's called will be used for a normal map. And when you combine it, it'll work something like that. I already have downloaded from texture.com a material that has given me a color material. It's kind of like this um, kind of granite type of effect. And I also have, not this one, but let me go to the other one. I think it's in this one, which is the one that I could use for the bump. So whatever is white is going to be highlighted, whatever is black is going to be dipped in or pushed in. So I'm going to try to connect those. I'm going to connect the first one to the color. I'm going to connect to um, the file right there. So let me give me a second. My computer sometimes just waits a few seconds to load up those windows. Okay, so that came up. So I'm going to just go and look for the color right there. I'm going to say open, and that shows up there. And I'm going to assign that material to the body of my octopus. So you're going to see right click on it and assign material to selection. So if I press 6 on my keyboard, I should be able to see that material applied on my object. And let me do another material. So this material, I'm going to call it AI standard body. And then I'm going to do another one for that helmet. So in the same way, I'm going to just say, I'm going to clean this workspace here. I'm going to create another standard shader, and this one is going to be connected to the other material that I have there, which is that metal material. The metal material has a problem, and that is that the texture is not a square, and we want to fit that texture on the UV area that this image has. So because the texture is going to fit exactly here. If I fit a non-square image in that space, it's going to compress it and it's going to make it look strange. So what I need to do is I need to launch Photoshop and correct the texture in Photoshop. So let's just do that. I need to go and open Adobe Photoshop. So here I am. I had my material here. Here is my metal file. So again, it is not square, and I will check what image size it has. It's 1600 by 1248. So I need to make it 1024 by 1024, which is a number that we know will work with Maya. So I'm going to try to change my window here so we can see the menu. There we go. So I'm going to say, I'm going to change my canvas size. I'm going to cut it, just cut in the middle. So I'm going to say cut in pixels. So it's going to be 1024 by 1024. From the middle, that should be fine. Okay. I'm going to say proceed. So that got cut like that, right there. And I'm going to just to save. This one is a new version, that way it loads my original. I'm going to call it metal square. Okay, so I'm gonna change that. Actually, I'm not going to use a JPEG for this one. I'm going to change it to use a TIFF format. I'd rather not use JPEGs for my files, for my texture specifically. It's not a good practice, so I'm going to use that one as a TIFF. So I'm going to go under the shader now that is connected or created for the helmet. I'm going to connect under the color that file, and I'm going to go and look for the specific file. Okay, here we go. So here is my metal square object. I'm going to say open, and then I'm going to connect that. Let me rename the shader, standard shader metal. And then I'm going to just select this object and assign that material to that object. So now I have a metal looking helmet with a granite looking body. Neither of them have a bump map connected to it. So we're going to do that by just simply using a texture connected to those. So let me just call my hypershade one more time, and I'm going to start by modifying the metal material which I have right here, and I'm going to go and simply connect. I don't have other texture for it, and this one should work because it's a grayscale. So I'm going to connect that one, the same texture, the color of that one, connected into the bump of this one. But in the case of the bump for this standard shader, the bump is applied under the geometry. Here is the bump mapping. So I'm going to do is I'm going to grab with the middle mouse button, I'm going to grab this node, I'm going to dump it on the name, not in the space, on the name, so that it generates a connection for the bump map. You can see the bump node appearing right there. And of course, that shows it right there. It feels a bit odd, and that's because it's making it reverse, so I need to actually push it the opposite. I'm going to say minus or negative 0.3. That way the scratches are going in and the helmet in general is going down, is going out. You can make it less if you don't want to make it too dramatic. I'm going to say 0.05. That way it's just a very, very subtle effect that the metal will produce. I'm going to do the same on this one. And for that one, I'm going to grab that text, that shader. I could go and look for it here, but I can easily grab it by selecting the object and click on the little icon that has a dot and the two nodes. That way that grabs the material there. And then in this case, I have a color texture, but I'm going to connect to that a bump map under that standard body. I go to the geometry, I'm going to connect there. This one I'm going to connect it directly through the file to, I'm sorry, not there, through the yellow one. I'm going to go and go connect it to the bump node, that bump texture that I already have. And in the same manner, it shows up there, and then I can just go and modify the texture as it shows. So I'm going to just go and turn down the bump depth, let's say to 0.05 also. So it's very minimal, so you'll see only the bump appearing in just certain areas, not everywhere. And there we go. I got my texture on my creature. So I'm going to go on my object. I'm going to save it as octopus texture 1. Okay. Let me create very quickly a Arnold light sky dome to see it in a rendered, to see how that looks. So I'm going to call my Arnold render view and tell it to render it. Right away I get to see the material. It's very bright and a bit much, but it is doing what I'm expecting it to do, to provide the information that I want. I'm going to stop it right there. So I got my first attempt to play with that. Of course, I can go back to Photoshop and change my textures and apply colors to it, but that's a direct way of creating textures connected to materials.